pretty much across the board and never think that a ethical live service game could ever exist. And we've had some in the past. But when you look at a studio like Grinding Gear Games, you can see pretty much across the board that players hold them in the exact same regard as Larian Studios, Digital Extremes with Warframe, or FromSoft. Studios that they know that any changes they make or any games they come out with always will have the player in mind. They trust that those companies will have the player in mind. Trust. Now that's something
that's opposed to like Ubisoft. Obviously, the biggest one for me is EA. In the way that sports games goes, that is rough. The way sports games go for EA is, whew, something else, dude. It's terrible. I will never play or buy a Madden game. Ubisoft is in the same path right now. They're doing terribly. All of the larger AAAs that you would think are doing pretty bad. And then the other developers, effectively, your like you said, Grinding Gear Games, Larry, and DE for Warframe, everything like that, they are doing better. They're more trusted. They're more trusted than AAA developers, which is a huge deal.
Thing that we rarely see anymore, especially within this industry. I know that I very rarely trust any of these companies, and the vast majority of us feel like we can't anymore, especially when it comes to live service games. That's something that we don't normally see there because, well, these are the titles that have come to symbolize everything that's wrong with the games industry today. They exploit our time and our money. They're looking to manipulate our wallets. Heck, they're trying to manipulate our minds. They're spending millions on gambling and casino research, trying to figure out how to keep players in games long.
They did a big thing where they showed that, it was a big deal for a while where they showed that people were hiring on, the same people that would do psychology for casinos and such were being hired on for these games and live service games. I think, in my opinion, one of the most ethically monetized games is Warframe. But then you look at the flip side of that coin, and the biggest one is First Descendant. First Descendant is the monetization is terrible. It's horrendous. It's Warframe, it charges you for a lot, yes, but it has a way for you to gain that currency and everything too in game by just playing, and it's easy. It's not hard to get platinum in Warframe. First Descendant, there is no trade. The only way to get their stuff is through specifically buying it. You have no trading system. They've said we're going to bring in a trading system, but they have yet to do that, which is a big deal. Because how often is it that you have developers say that they're going to do something, but don't do it until the last moment that they have to, which is a huge thing. Warframe currency is top tier. You don't have to actually buy the plat with IRL money. Exactly. You can play the game fully free to play and get everything that the platinum would be able to get you by just being able to play, farming things, and people do trade for platinum and do trade for items still. It's crazy. I mean, I just traded someone for some sort of frame piece. I think it was a systems component, and I got like 40 platinum off it. It was kind of wild, actually. I did that a while back. You can do that, but First Descendant isn't the same. And the biggest thing that's the big problem is that they've said we're going to bring trading, but they have yet to do so. They said that on game's release. It's now been how long since the game came out? Quite a long time. And how often is that companies do that, where they say we are going to bring this feature that is going to much more. It's going to amplify the player's experience within the game, but don't do so until they are pushed to the point where they have to do it because they said they were going to. So that last minute thing, it's too common.
Longer and spending more money rather than trying to deliver us meaningful content. That part always seems to be lost in the wind somewhere. Ethical, well-supported live service games seem like a myth. There's only a few of them that are out there, but that's because the vast majority of these companies do not have the respect that's necessary for the audience or the passion for creativity.
I don't even think it's just that. I don't think it's about just like respect for players or passion. I think that there's a lot of developers within these companies that do have the passion, do have the respect. I mean, and do want to be involved and want to make good games. But I think the problem is too is like if we're being honest, players keep buying. We keep spending our money and we keep buying into these things. I mean, I bought Call of Duty this year, and here's the thing: I'm probably gonna buy the one next year. Like people still buy Madden with EA, even though they know it is literally a reskin and a roster update. There's nothing else that changes. If anything, some of them actually get worse from year to year. But people still will buy it. And that is the problem, is that no matter what, you're gonna have people out there, and enough people that they're gonna buy the games. We've seen that waver a bit in your Dragon Age Veilguard or your Concord or things like that, where the time that I think the times that people say, you know what, no, we're not gonna play into this, is when it has something to do with woke and it brings into a level of politics. But even a game doesn't have to be woke to be a bad game or poorly monetized or a waste of players' time or disrespectful to their players just in general. And it's so many times though where you have that and there's still bad games, but people still play them and buy them. And they'll continue to do it. I mean, how many games do you have that come out from, you know, that are Genshin Impact, Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero? Like these are they're all the same game, but people are still spending loads of money to get these new characters from the pools. They're gotcha games, and people are still buying them. So it's not a matter of always developers having the respect for their players. It's developers knowing that people are just going to buy it anyway. They don't have a lot to fear. That's changing as of recently, I think, but it's taken a long time to do so.
I don't think, maybe it's just me, but for some odd reason, things just feel different. It just hasn't been the same for a long time. It doesn't feel like developers and publishers are making games because, well, it's for the love of the game. They're not making games that they actually want to play. It's all for investors and the money and for political or social political reasons or whatever it might be. But in the case
That's true.
of many of the games that I've seen be successful over the last couple of years, it ends up being those games that have that old soul, that have that old heart. When I look at a game like Path of Exile or Baldur's Gate 3 or something like that, these are the games that are succeeding right now. And Grinding Gear Games has done an incredible job at maintaining and cultivating an audience that trusts them, truly trusts them. And that's something that's really special. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about the history of Path of Exile. I want to talk about Path of Exile 2, and I want to talk about where all this is heading and how Grinding Gear Games has brought back something that this industry has lost: trust. Grinding Gear Games was founded.
I don't know if it's necessarily law. Like the industry itself hasn't fully lost trust because you've always had someone like Grinding Gear Games. You had at one point you had Digital Extremes, and you still do. You have Larian Studios. You have Grinding Gear Games. There is still trust in the industry. And here's the thing: as new games continue to come out and people continue to do well with certain games. I mean, you have certain games. I mean, I trust something that the developers of Palworld are going to make. I trust that. Hold on, real quick. All right, sorry about that. But like, you always have someone, you always have developers that are going to come out with games that are going to be great games, like Power. And their previous game I know was mix a combination of quite a few different things. That people compare it to your Zelda or Genshin, which or Genshin I feel like is kind of a ripoff of Zelda, but at this point the reality is every game is a ripoff of something. And so but the point of all that is ultimately is that there is still trust in the industry, but trust is being lost in the large players within said industry. Trust is being lost with the people that we used to have trust for, and it's being gained in different areas of the video game industry, like with Larry and DE, Grinding Gear Games, or whoever it may be. That is where our trust is going to. So it's not that it's being lost; it's that it's just being shifted to a different area and a different aspect. And we're seeing these large developers, these AAA developers, drop, and these, well, I guess what you would call AA developers rise.
In 2006 by 3 developers from New Zealand, Chris Wilson, Jonathan Rogers, and Eric Olofsson. Each of them brought a unique skill set to the table, with Wilson specializing in software development and Rogers and Olofsson focusing in game design and programming. Their journey began with a shared passion for action role-playing games, especially Diablo 2. Wilson, frustrated with the industry's shift towards more casual play, envisioned something of a return to the game's roots, focusing on deep gameplay, meaningful character progression, and a dark, immersive world. This vision would eventually take shape as Path of Exile. At the time, Diablo 2 was the pinnacle of ARPGs, and Wilson and his friends spent thousands of hours in its world. But after exhausting it, they had turned to other games like Torchlight, Dungeon Siege, and Titan Quest, only to find that those games didn't have that same staying power as Diablo 2. They wanted a new game to play. They recognized that there was a gap within the market. No game had captured that same depth and replayability as Diablo 2, so they decided to build something that could fill that void. A Diablo 2 successor that you could play forever. From the beginning, Grinding Gear Games adopted a simple but...
I think that's a huge deal too, is people being able to recognize that void. Look at recently, even like Marvel Rivals. Overwatch was not filling the void of a hero shooter, and so people wanted something to fill that void. And it was a big misconception, I think, when Concord came out. People thought, oh, so hero shooters aren't the way. People don't want hero shooters because the Concord failed. But Concord didn't fail because there was a overabundance or a lack of desire within that market for a hero shooter. Concord failed because it was bad. It did it bad. Marvel Rivals has succeeded because there is a desire for a hero shooter, and a different hero shooter that's not Overwatch or Team Fortress 2. That's why Marvel Rivals is succeeding, is because people did want something to fill that void. They wanted something more to play, but they wanted it to be good. They wanted it to be worth their time. They wanted to play as characters that they cared about or that they wanted to be involved with. That is Marvel Rivals, and you can't ignore the fact that they have an IP on their side, but at the same time, people wanted that hero shooter experience done well, because Overwatch wasn't filling that void by no means. It was not good. It was designed. They turned Overwatch into an esport, which felt bad for all the majority of people playing it, and then it started to even feel bad for the people that were playing it as esports. Team Fortress 2 is just so old. Unfortunately, it doesn't have that staying power that it should. Where so people want something new. They want something interesting. Who wouldn't want to play as Iron Man and shoot Wanda or Mr. Fantastic, right? Exactly. You have IP, you have desire in the market, and they've been able to. NetEase has seen that desire in the market. They saw what was going on with Overwatch, and they saw that people wanted something that was better, and they filled that, and they did it well. They did it better than Overwatch did it even when they released, in my opinion. So being able to recognize that gap and then getting a group of people who love and want to fill that gap because they just want a game that they want to play themselves is a big deal. Like he's saying with Grinding Gear Games and that ARPG genre.
Effective philosophy, one grounded in common sense principles. I know that's something that's relatively foreign nowadays, but I mean, if you think about it, the idea of making a Diablo 2 successor alone is already a common sense kind of thing, because, well, there was a game that was out there that there was no competition for, a decade gap between releases, one of the most popular games, one of the most profitable games of all time. Why wouldn't you want to make a game that could compete with that? It's a slam dunk. The foundation of that game
If you do it wrong, here's the answer. So why wouldn't you want to make a game to compete with it? Is because if you do it wrong, then it can ruin you forever. Especially if this is, I mean, the risk involved is extremely high. If when you are trying to especially compete with something as loved as Diablo 2, if you don't do it right, then you can have a lot of issues. And that's a pretty big deal. I think that that's not looked at. I mean, when you look at it from the standpoint of risk, it may to a lot of developers, it may not be worth that risk, which is totally okay. I think that's fine for you to feel, for developers to feel that way. Like, okay, this isn't worth the risk, but it doesn't give them the right to make something bad. At the end of the day, or if they take the risk and it's bad, I don't think that's good either. But that's why it's a risk, because if it's bad, then it's just going to be hated on. It's not going to be appreciated, and no one's going to be excited for what that developer has to make next, especially when it's the first game that they're making. That's the thing, is as I'm sitting here looking at making, like I've shown, making a looter shooter-esque ARPG. If it doesn't measure up to the quality of your Warframe or Destiny or since ARPG or your Path of Exile 2 or Diablo 2, if it doesn't measure up to that quality, or if anything exceed that quality, then, and it fails, then my studio that I'm wanting to do, and any game I make in the future, is going to be looked at with a cover of the previous failing game I made that was not as good as what was already out. So that's why people don't.
Would be built around 5 core pillars. The first of the pillars was visceral action combat. In 2006, when they started development on the game, many ARPGs at the time had very simple combat, but they felt that a real successful ARPG needed to look and feel like real action. Many RPGs and action RPGs at the time were emulating World of Warcraft because that was the most popular game that was out. However, they wanted something more dynamic, and that's what they went after. The second pillar of theirs was randomly generated levels. ARPGs are a grind. Hundreds of hours are going to be played on a single character, and every single run needs to feel fresh and unpredictable. Otherwise, players are going to get bored. Number 3 was randomly generated items. This is the heart of any loot or systems-driven ARPG. The thrill of chance and the chase for better loot is what keeps us hooked. That's why we keep playing these games. Everyone wants to find that god roll item or the perfect combination of gear that none of their friends have or have even seen. The fourth is the most interesting one to me, and it's a secure online economy. Now, this is something that I think a lot of games overlook, and they felt the same way, and I'd argue it's one of the things that really sets their game apart from everyone else. They understood the importance of a stable, fair economy because it gives players and the items that they find more value. Because, well, now other...
I think it's big to notate here, too, that with their secure online economy for Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2, that economy is not based on real world money. That economy is based primarily on all in-game items. So your currency is in-game items. You are trading for in-game items. You're trading for exalt orbs. You're trading for all those kinds of things. And so it's not based on you spending your money or grinding to make things that are worth real money. I know that there is games that do that right, like Warframe, for instance, where platinum can be bought with real money or it can be traded. But it is a better decision, I think, to instead create an item in the game that can function as currency and is valuable enough for that, but is also valuable enough to matter within the game. That is what exalted orbs are. They actually have a benefit of trading them in the game for certain items. If I get an item for, say, a witch class, and I'm playing a warrior, I can trade that for an exalted orb that can benefit my warrior items and give them that witch item or equipment or whatever it would be, or armor piece that can benefit their class. It's having that system is a big deal. So having a tradable currency in the game that isn't just a standalone transaction currency. It's not just a transaction fee currency effectively. It's something that can actually be beneficial within the game, is a very, very big deal that Path of Exile has and Path of Exile 2 has that a lot of games don't do, because nowadays it is just monetized currency where you can buy it and all it is effectively fake money. That's the wrong way to do things, in my opinion.
Players have a value that's associated to that item and they can trade with other players. Not only is this making your runs more valuable because you're finding things of value, but also it's giving a lot of flexibility that's needed in a game that has so much build diversity. Number 5 is deep character customization, which pretty much ties in with everything else that's here. It's the one thing that scares players away from Path of Exile, myself included for many years, by the way. And it's the design pillar that they've sunk probably the most effort into. Players need the freedom to be able to shape their characters in unique ways. You want to have your own personal expression in the game. However,
like Fortnite and V-Bucks, it's IRL money for a fake type of currency. Exactly. You're literally trading money for a symbol, for a number. You are trading your real life money for a number on your screen that there's now associated value for said number. Whereas in Path of Exile 2, everything is monetized as far as cosmetics. There is no monetization of items that can be bought in game to increase or decrease the abilities of your character. Everything is cosmetic. The only thing that's maybe close is you can say that there is stash slots. You can buy slots in your stash and add more stash slots, but that is you get enough stash slots, in my opinion, baseline with just starting the game. You don't need to buy any. You could play the whole entire game without those slots, without buying more. So they provide you exactly what you need previously in those stash slots, but then you can choose to buy more focused ones. So if you want a stash slot for just your currencies, your orbs, you can buy an orb specific slot. Just makes it to where you don't have to filter through and play Tetris as effectively. Or you can just do the Tetris if you don't want to buy that specific stash tab. So they do it very well where you don't buy in-game items. All those in-game items are earned. You play the game, you earn exalted orbs so that you can use those to either level up and increase your gear that you already have or make it better. And it's what in Path of Exile 2, it's called crafting items. Or you can use it as a trade currency to get an item that you need from another player. So you're not just spending your money, you buy the game. And not even that, the game is going to be free to play. The only type of time you're spending extra money is if you're buying cosmetics within the game. That's it. It has nothing to do with gameplay benefits or anything. Now, here's the thing: is if we're being honest, Fortnite is the same thing, where that those V-Bucks are just for cosmetics, which is good. But it is the same where you are just trading it for a number on a screen that a developer tells you has value, and that's not my favorite way of doing things, I guess.
Path of Exile throws convention out the window and says that any class can be anything. A witch can use a bow and arrow, a ranger can summon armies of the dead, just do whatever you want. And that freedom is what brought so many players into this game. These pillars would come to reflect a studio that wasn't aiming for immediate, overwhelming financial success, but a studio that just wanted to create a game that would deeply resonate with players that were a fan of that genre. They wanted to take the foundation that was set by Diablo 2 and other ARPGs and stretch it as far as it could go. Essentially, they wanted to make their dream game, and that's exactly what they did. Initially, Grinding Gear's modest goal was to attract 10,000 players. They felt that's what they needed to be able to stay sustainable at the very least, while they were working with a very small skeleton crew at the time. But Path of Exile ended up debuting in 2013 to far more than they expected, a surge of up over 70,000 concurrent players on launch. However, that success didn't last. As player numbers began to drop, Grinding Gear Games found themselves in a position in which, Well, maintaining that momentum was going to require a lot more than the incremental content updates that they were doing. The studio's early strategy was frequent updates. Basically, every single week they wanted to add in new armor, weapons, and skills, but that wasn't generating the kind of sustained excitement that they wanted. Basically, ever since they tasted the success of 70,000 concurrent players, they wanted to get back up there. Basically, Path of Exile needed something more to be able to keep the community engaged, so the team ended up experimenting with different challenge leagues and economy resets. They discovered that resetting the economy gave both new and veteran players a level playing field, basically creating a sense of anticipation and renewal, where
Hmm.
everybody can start off at the same point. The challenge leagues would introduce new content and different mechanics into the game, which would then give players something new and fresh to be able to tackle. Now, despite their best efforts, the first few attempts at introducing these features, such as Anarchy and Onslaught leagues, didn't really produce the same kind of sustained player retention that they were looking for, but they didn't give up. For the 1.0 launch of Path of Exile, they included an economy reset, a challenge league, Act 3 of their campaign, and a new
Hmm.
character in the Scion. This time, player numbers skyrocketed.
I think resets only work if there is a vast amount of content added with the reset. If you're just resetting to reset, I don't think that's a good thing. Um, in this style of game. In other styles of games, I think that is fine. You can argue that it's better and it's good. Take Tarkov, for instance. Tarkov is one where having resets at certain points is very, very good. But in this style of game, where it's not a PvP style or it's all PvE, resets just for the fun of for resetting isn't good. It's doing it with adding content makes the difference there. And that is a big deal that I don't think should or can be ignored. That grinding gear games did is each time they did a league and an economy reset, they added something to it instead of just resetting to reset.
Rocketed again, surpassing 70,000 players once more. It became clear that new content wasn't enough. They needed something significant enough to be able to capture the attention of both journalists and the players to spark excitement across the community. Now, as it is with live service games, after the 1.0 launch, the developers yet again found themselves under pressure as player numbers began to decline. They ended up releasing Sacrifice of Vol expansion, which introduced new bosses and skill gems. That brought another temporary spike in activity, but it wasn't the lasting success that they desired. They
Hmm.
also launched Forsaken Masters, which included customizable player housing and crafting systems, but once again, a short spike was short lived. As more
Hmm.
leagues like Torment and Bloodlines were released, the team found that small content patches just weren't enough to be able to keep players engaged in the long term. They questioned whether it was time for them to move on and just make another game. However, there was something really incredible happening in the background because through all of this trial and error, Grinding Gear Games was learning some really crucial lessons that would end up setting the stage for their future success. I mean, keep in mind, every single update they made was added content to the game, making it bigger and bigger and bigger, giving more content for more players to sink their teeth into when they would eventually try the game for the first time or return to it after a while away. They realized that the economy resets were definitely necessary. They needed to keep those in there because it kept the game fresh. They had also learned that the small content patches were not creating enough buzz or excitement to retain players or even try to reach new players, and they also learned that mid-league balancing was often upsetting their player base, especially when a lot of their hard-earned builds and gear were.
I think that small content patches didn't work because of the game that it is, because of the genre that it is. Because I want to look back at like Fortnite when Fortnite was doing its weekly updates where it was changing guns and everything. That was holding everyone in, and then they stopped with those weekly updates, and that's when everyone left. As far as I remember, at least that's when I did, and I could be wrong, but I think that's when everyone started to kind of bow out on the game. In the sense it matters because it's the type of game. I don't think that it's just a blanket statement that weekly content updates aren't enough for games, because there is some like battle royales where that can be enough to hold a huge portion of players, given that the developers don't run out of ideas, which is going to happen eventually, of course, and then they're going to start recycling content. But if they can get content going for a long time before they start recycling, then even that recycled content will again feel new because it's been so long since you've had it. But I don't know if you can just blanket statements say that it's not going to hold players into the game for very long, because I think specifically with like Fortnite, it did. It did until they stopped doing those weekly content updates. And that's what then kind of dropped people off of the game. And then it's had its rises since, and it's had its downs and ups and everything like that. But the first drop and the first break off from the spikes that it was having was when they stopped updating the game as frequently as they did. That's what killed it.
Essentially bricked. However, there was still one thing that was plaguing the game, and they couldn't figure out what it was. In comes Kripparrian, a Twitch streamer and YouTuber known for being the first person and the only person to beat Inferno difficulty in Diablo 3 on hardcore, as that difficulty was later than toned down in future patches. Honestly, this is still one of the most incredible feats in ARPGs, absolute legend, by the way. However, Kripparrian's input on Path of Exile was pivotal. He had spoke to Chris Wilson and emphasized the importance about predictable content releases, explaining that players need to know when new content is coming and when to expect regular updates. Using an example, he said that he streamed every day and posted content every day at the exact same time because people come to expect it. And the minute that you're not there, well, they go to look for someone else to entertain them. The developers ended up taking this advice to heart.
That's huge. That's a huge thing that you can't look over. Especially, it's really cool that I think it's related to content, specifically like Twitch, right? I've learned with when you're not streaming on Twitch, you don't exist. You don't have record. You effectively have disappeared off the face of the planet. So what do? You upload to YouTube, because on YouTube, you don't disappear. Your video stays forever. It can always be found. It can always be looked at. It can always get a spike in activity and have people caring. I mean, I just recently had, I'll show you. I just had a video pop off. Well, pop off from me. 866 views, which is more than I've had previously. That's a huge deal. But this didn't happen until 3 to 4 days after I had posted that video. That is not something that happens on Twitch. So that's a really big deal about that, is that if you're not live on Twitch, you're not existent. And it can be the same for games. When it's not new, it's disappeared. It's gone.
And they transformed the way that the game was supported. 13-week cycles, with 2 major content patches each year and 2 smaller patches in between. Players could then rely on a consistent rhythm of new content and a full economy reset to keep things fresh. And this is where the game really picked up steam, because that schedule started with Talisman League in 2015, followed by Essence, Breach, Legacy, and others. The introduction of Atlas of Worlds with Path of Exile 3.0 marked a significant turning point, as it added mapping and a more defined endgame to the game. As they continued refining their approach, they were able to introduce new mechanics like Bestiary, Incursion, Delve, Betrayal, all while keeping what players enjoyed and removing what players didn't. This is what helped to maintain the game's success and popularity over the years. And from my perspective, this is one of the most special components of the game. And
and you see too in that, like, it had its peaks, but overall it continued to gain numbers, because each time it peaked, it probably got new players, and then more and more players though stayed and became veteran players, like probably Warframe, for example. The more new people that play it, the more are going to stay and become veterans. And so over time, that is going to keep rising and rising and rising and rising and rising. That's cool.
Over the years, and from my perspective, this is one of the most special components of the game. And it's the fact that the players ultimately influence what this game looks like over time as they vote in and out different seasonal elements. So not only does the game have an incredibly deep build variety with skill gems, and an expansive skill tree and flexible classes, but year over year, the game's world is permanently transformed by the will of its players. There is always more to do after each league, and new and returning players are going to have just that much more content to experience. What I find truly fascinating about the development and success of Path of Exile is how the player experience is consistently prioritized in every aspect of the game. Whether it's balancing the game and ensuring fairness by avoiding any changes mid-league, keeping or removing content based on player feedback, how they communicate directly with their audience. Hell, the whole reason that they went free to play is
Trading in Warframe right now, Zaku Prime Systems for 30 plat. That's pretty good. I'm gonna have to try to farm those out. That's a lot of plat for a systems component. Jeez, I'm gonna farm that out for sure at some point.
because they didn't think that
Probably do that
anyone
tomorrow.
would buy it, and this is the only way that they could make the game available to the most people. Everything was driven by a desire for a player-first experience. This mentality even extends to the game's monetization strategy, and from my perspective, this is why the game has remained so successful. Path of Exile monetizes
I need a
two main
list of all
channels,
the most
stash tabs
valuable.
and cosmetics. Neither of these are essential to enjoying
I'll
the
have to
game
look that
unless you
up.
like
Look up
hoarding
a
items or you want
list
to
of all
engage
the most
with the game's
valuable,
online trade economy. Most casual players
Prime
are likely going to
components.
play this game
That
solo
way I can
or with
farm
friends,
out
playing
like
the game solo
2 of
self-bound
each
without
and then
ever
sell
even
one.
needing to have a premium stash tab in the first place. I spent money the first time I was playing the game. I assumed that I would have to spend money like any other free-to-play game, only to find myself never even using any of that extra space because I played it like I would any other AR.
That's a big deal. I have in Path of Exile 2, I have stash tabs that I got as premium tabs, which is just literally a premium tab. The only thing it changed is it allowed me to change the name of it. So instead of being labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, I changed it to being a specific thing. I don't even use them. I don't need those tabs. I didn't need to spend the money. I have effectively wasted money, but that's in a way that's my fault, but that's also a good thing that I'm not in end game by any means. I'm about mid game right now for it, but I haven't had to touch. My gosh, I have freaking hiccups, dude. Excuse me. I haven't had to touch those premium tabs that I bought, which is kind of cool because I can just use a player can come in and not spend money.
RPG. I picked up what I needed and I threw away what I didn't. Now, what I absolutely love is that Grinding Gear Games has publicly stated that their monetization approach is shaped by the game itself, not the other way around. As an example, new cosmetics release when a league starts, but as that league starts to wind down and a new league is set to launch, wide sweeping discounts come across the entire store for returning players to be able to pick up things on the cheap. Also,
That's
can
cool.
I just say how refreshing it is to see that this is one of the very few games that are out there, might be one of the only games that's out there, that doesn't obfuscate their currency and try to confuse players on how much items are worth or how much money they're spending. For instance, $30 is 300 coins, $50 is 500 coins. I am so sick and tired of seeing companies with 13 different premium currencies, all of them with different exchange rates, and making it near impossible to see how far your money goes.
I hate to say it, that is a downside I think of Warframe, is that they do that in a way where like they will make it to where you have just too little to get an item if you spend a certain amount of money. Like you will be able to get an item, but then you're just a little under. But they don't sell you that little bit. They just sell you a larger package that you have to get. And even Path of Exile does that where you have to buy it in packages. I would like to see a game that allows you to buy it on the dollar. So a dollar is 1 or 2 or 3, or whatever, or 10, say. So $5 is 50 coins. If you want to call them coins, a dollar is 10 coins. So if you're 10 coins under, you can just spend the dollar, get your 10 coins, and buy the item you're looking to get. More games need to do that, but they generally will charge you the $5 price tag for the 50 coins, and then you'll get the 10 you need, but then all of a sudden you have 40, which is just under probably what you need for an item. So then you have to buy another $5 package to get the other 10, but then puts you down below. It's like, they need to allow you to buy them on the dollar. That would be awesome. And I think people would do that. People would not spend. It's like, okay, I get if something costs, say it's 60 coins, $5 for the 50, $1 for the 10, boom, $6. Great. That works. I think that could be worth it.
In a sea of greed and psychological manipulation, Path of Exile is taking the high road. I think what makes Path of Exile so compelling isn't just its depth or its innovative gameplay, it's the studio's unwavering commitment to putting the player first. Grinding Gear Games has consistently, time and time again, demonstrated a rare ability to adapt, learn from their mistakes, and evolve, all while staying true to what their vision for the game is. The game's success is a direct result of their focus on a balanced, player-driven ecosystem where content and the monetization are carefully considered, ensuring that the player experience comes before anything else. From the beginning, their goal was not just to build a game, but to build a game that players would not want to stop playing. Not because they felt like they had to keep playing the game, but because they wanted to keep playing the game and support it.
Or
when I look at,
or you know what they need to do, the best thing you could do, instead of making you buy, or say you do have a premium currency in the game, right? An in-game currency, a premium currency, that's fine. But let me put, say I put $10 on my Steam wallet. The in-game item costs $8. If in the game I would have to spend that full $10 to get the full amount of coins I would need, let me just spend from my Steam wallet or your PlayStation wallet or whatever it would be, $8 exactly to get the $8 worth of currency I need to buy that specific item, so that I can still have my $2 in my Steam wallet. I don't have to transfer that $2 into this currency. They should allow you to do that. I think that is, in my opinion, a huge respect for the player and for their money. If you allow them to buy the in-game, I don't have an issue with monetizing or anything, and I don't think a lot of people do. I have an issue with how it's done, though, in a lot of ways. Let me buy the item with the exact amount of money that the item costs. Don't make me buy packages that are higher than that amount that put me just below the next item. Just let me buy the item for that amount, the exact amount.
Look at the origins and the original success of Path of Exile. It all just feels so common sense. I mean, just the idea of them making a Diablo 2 successor when there was like a 10-year gap where there was just nobody that was making a game that even stepped up to the doorstep of what that game delivered. It just makes so much sense. They just took all of the core pillars that made that game successful and expanded on them infinitely for the most part, and that's exactly what players want. And it feels common sense because that's what a lot of players, fans of those games, would want. That's exactly what we were thinking of. And the funny thing is, well, they're fans. That's the game that they wanted to make. That's how they came up with the idea to make the game in the first place, because they put in the time. They already had thousands of hours into Diablo.
I think that's a huge deal. Being a fan of what you're making. That's something I struggled with too. When I was looking at trying to design, okay, what kind of game do I want to make? What kind of thing do I want to do? It's like, okay, I'll just make this game, or I'll just do this, or I'll just do this because this is more reasonable. This is, whatever. No, you need to be a fan of the game you want to make. You need to enjoy playing your own game. If you can't enjoy playing the game that you're working on, then other people are not going to enjoy it as well. And that is a huge deal. A huge deal that is overlooked, I think, a lot.
Diablo 2. It makes a lot of sense that that's the game that they would make. I've covered a lot of Ubisoft and their downfall, and a lot of the issues that company's had, and I think a lot of people either don't know or don't realize that they didn't get into this industry because they wanted to make games. They got into it because they wanted to distribute games. And I think that some of the most successful games, some of the studios that we've grown to love, got into this industry because there was a game that they wanted to make. Path of Exile.
Dude, I was just thinking about that kind of principle where I think that people take jobs at places like Ubisoft or EA or Blizzard or wherever those big companies are. People take jobs because they want to be a game developer. They just want to make games. And it's not that you're not taking that job just because you like the style of games that company is making. You just want to be a game developer. I think that there's a degree of status behind that sounds cool. It sounds fun. It sounds like it's a great thing to do. especially for a gamer. And so it's like you put that, and people take those jobs, but then you have people who maybe they love Minecraft, and then but they're working on Madden. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe that person loves Warframe, but they're working on Stardew Valley. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, you know? And so and that's the thing, is it's like people need to enjoy the game that they're making. They need to enjoy the genre and the aspects of that game enough to play that game even when they're not working on that game, which is something that Grinding Gear Games does. They've said that they are always playing their game because they like it. They built it because they like the game. It's a huge deal.
POE2, that's the game that they wanted to make. Gamers making games for gamers. Bungie and the original Halo, Larian Studios, and Divinity. I look at Game Science and Black Myth Wukong. You have to have a fundamental love for the thing that you want to make to really understand it the right way.
Exactly.
You have to understand the audience because you are the audience. That's how it works. You're making the game that you want to make, and that is so important in this industry. And I think it's something that a lot of these companies are getting away from, and that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of their games are struggling. I mean, even just the idea of having a trade league, an active online economy for your game. You have to really understand what the phrase all players means, because that's how you make a game that reaches all players, because you end up creating new types of players inside these games. I didn't realize this until I put over 200 hours into Path of Exile 2, but I'm a merchant. I like sitting in my base and selling gear. I like picking up gear and rolling it and crafting on it and seeing if I can find something, even if it's not for my class, just so I can throw it up and make some money. I like sitting back and watching YouTube videos and stuff like that, and selling the gear that I've collected over my playthrough. And I find a lot of enjoyment in that. To be able to make that kind of experience, you have to be a fan of those kind of games. You have to really understand the players in a way that very few do. You know, I
think the biggest thing is understanding. That is the key word, is understanding the players and understanding what it is that those players are looking for. When you're making, say you're making Madden, you're making a sports game, Madden, you're making hockey, NHL, or anything along those lines, MLB, like, you need to be a fan. If you're making a Madden game, then you should be a football fan. You should be watching football. You shouldn't be designing a game and not like football, or not be into the sport of, or the thing that it is you're making a game about. He mentioned Game Science and Black Myth Wukong. They are genuine fans of the writing of the Journey to the West. And so they made a game on Journey to the West. And whatever their next game is going to be, I guarantee you that they are going to be fans of if it's that piece of literature, or that the mythology of whatever it is they decide to do. They are most likely going to be fans of it, and the people that are working on that game are going to be fans of that thing that they're doing. When you have someone working on a Call of Duty, you want someone who enjoys the aspects of military tactics and strategy and guns and weapons and combat and those kinds of things. You want people that enjoy it. If like, I think that's the biggest thing, is that you have people taking jobs. Like I said, you have people taking jobs at places, big companies, to work on games because they want the title of the game developer, not because they care or have an interest in the thing that it is they are making, or the game that it is they're creating. They don't have that interest.
interviewed Jonathan Rogers, the director, one of the directors of Path of Exile, and he had this banger line that I need to share with you guys.
Well, at the end of the day, what we're doing is making a game that we enjoy, right? Like, we're making a game that we think is cool. And I think the danger really comes when you try to make a game for an audience that you're not part of. Like I think that's where you start to make
Exactly.
games that appeal to nobody. Because you probably the people you're trying to make a game for that aren't you feel patronized by whatever it is you're doing, and the
There's a lot of examples of that.
yeah, and you don't, and also you don't, once again, you just don't know what it is they want. Like the only person that I know, like the person I know the
I just want to point out, Jonathan Rogers, that dude's got some big hands. Those things, can you imagine those things slapping you? Dude, look at the size of his hands. They're huge. I like slap fight, like slap boxing, like, you know what I mean, or like slap fights, like it's a literal sport. I think it's kind of cool. I've seen Moist Critical react to some of those and stuff, and I think it's cool. That dude should get into some slap fighting, because my word, look at those freaking meat fingers, dude. Those are some big hands. Love the guy. I think he is great. I've seen this interview, the whole thing. Seen a lot of his interviews. Love him. But those are huge hands, dude.
the most what they want is myself, right?
Yeah.
Like I know exactly what I'm looking for in a game, and so and
Dude, look how little the mic is in just a finger. He is holding the majority of that mic in one finger. The rest of it is just a wire. That's his finger. Like, pause. He is gripping the mic with a finger because it's that his hands are that big. That's unreal.
and also like a lot of the people on the team as well, like like the people on the development team really need to like what it is they're making. So as I said, we're making a game for ourselves primarily.
That's what I said.
I think
That's
if
what
we
he
do
said.
that we will find an audience of people who are like us, who enjoy this kind of thing.
The danger comes when you're making a game for an audience that you're not a part of. Doesn't that just sum up things just so succinctly?
Yep.
Yep. I look at a lot of the games that have failed over the last couple of years, especially with the live service games, and in every single case, I see a game that was made for what they thought people wanted, not for what people actually wanted, because they don't understand those things, because they're not making those.
Two words. I guess it can be three, but it's a word together. Firewalk Studios. Making Concord because it's a game that they think people are going to want. The game came apparently what they say 10 years too late. Not even that, because we just discussed how it's not even when the game came or the style of game, but they made it bad. Because how much do you want to bet the developers that were at Firewalk Studios were not a fan of the game that they made? They made a game based on on what they thought was a demand in the market. So they made the game based on that. They did not make the game because they liked the game and because they wanted to engage in playing the game. How much do you want to bet the developers at Firewalk Studios, when the game released or any time prior, did not play the game unless they had to? But none of them, I guarantee you, were sitting down saying, I want to go play Concord. They were probably sitting down and they said, I'm going to go back. I'm going to play something like Stardew Valley or something along those lines that was not part of the community of the game that they made.
Games for themselves. I look across the entire industry, and whether it's monetization or how these games are being developed or marketed, it feels like an alien in a skin suit. I've been trying to find a word that sums up a lot of the issues that I see in the games industry. It's forced. That's the word for an audience that you're not a part of. Doesn't that just sum up things just so succinctly? I look at a lot of the games that have failed over the last couple of years, especially with the live service games. In every single case, I see a game that was made for what they thought people wanted, not for what people actually wanted, because they don't understand those things, because they're not making those games for themselves. You know, I look across the entire industry, and whether it's monetization or how these games are being developed or marketed, it feels like an alien in a skin suit. I've been trying to find a word that sums up a lot of the issues that I see in the games industry. It's forced. That's the word. It's forced. The monetization is forced. The narratives are forced. The social agendas are forced. The characters, the themes, the genres.
I definitely agree. I think that the biggest one is like, aside from politics, because I think about it, I'm like, the majority of the games that have come out that have been quote unquote woke or things like that, those are definitely obviously forced. It's forcing that, the politics and the wokeness and everything like that. But I think the biggest thing is there's been this force of I don't know if it's like, I don't know how to say it. It's like unlikable characters. Like, I'm not sure why it is that developers currently are so inclined to deliver these stories with characters in them that nobody wants to engage with. And that's the biggest problem, is that there is characters in these games that are not likable, they're not relatable, and it's that's what's killing the games mostly. You look at things like Concord, you look at Forspoken, those kinds of things. Those characters that are in those games are not enjoyable characters. Whether it's they don't look good, they don't act okay, or they're annoying, or whatever it would be. It's like, don't get me wrong, I love the games, but it's like, if every single game you played, the main character was Claptrap in Borderlands, and only Claptrap, and that was your only option, was Claptrap, it gets annoying. And so they are forcing these characters, and that's the biggest problem, is for some reason they think that consumers want these overly sarcastic, like teenage acting characters that are just unlikable. And so that's what kills games. I mean, you look at, obviously, Concord, Marvel Rivals is the easiest to compare to. Like I've said before, Concord and Marvel Rivals are the same style game. They're both hero shooters with the same exact game modes and everything, but their characters between the two are what make or break it. If Concord had better characters and it had likable characters and everything like that, then I guarantee you it probably would have done a lot better. Also, it had to have some gameplay issues and things like that for sure, but at least if the characters were a lot more liked, or if the characters were a lot more enjoyable to look at and to play as, or cooler, or whatever it would be, then it would have succeeded way better.
Everything is just so forced, and players are rejecting it. They're not clicking with it because it's not made for them, because it's not made by people that are making the games for themselves, and that's how things should be. And that's why Path of Exile 1 succeeded, and from my perspective, that's why Path of Exile 2 is going to go even further. Launching into early access, Path of Exile 2 quickly soared up to over 578,000 players, more than double the peak concurrent player count of the original Path of Exile, while pulling similar numbers across PlayStation and Xbox.
Players, for sure.
Now, well over a month since its launch, it's still maintaining around 300,000 players on Steam, ranking in the top 10 most played games on the platform. Really good. Now, keep in mind that this breakout success happened at the exact same time that Marvel Rivals was released to massive player numbers. While neither of these games share really anything similar outside of being a live service game, we typically see popular games.
Which, on top of, it's not mentioned, or maybe he does mention it, but on top of everything, not only is it that this is coming out and it's been able to hold that amount of players, Marvel Rivals has also been able, since release, to hold around 400,000 to 500,000 players concurrently. That is at the same time. So that is a total between just these two games. You're looking at close to 7 to 8, maybe 900,000 players, 7, 8, or 900,000 players between just these two games. That is insane numbers. Insane numbers. And both games are well deserved for it.
Is being affected in some way. However, neither of these games were bothered by either release. I think it's incredibly important to take note of the fact that not only was there another popular release around the time of this game's launch, but it also happens to be a free-to-play game that's unfinished and they were selling access to the game for a minimum of a $30 supporter pack. There are a lot of factors here to be able to turn players away, but the players ignored them, and for good reason. I now have well over 200 hours played into Path of Exile, and even as a content creator, that isn't normal for me. I tend to bounce around to different games while I work on different things or research different things. However, Path of Exile 2 has genuinely become a problem for me. I'm just going to say that it has completely ruined my entire workflow. Every single day that I sit down, I need to start writing or recording something. I tell myself, I'm just going to do a quick map or two, and then poof, my entire day is gone in an instant. Path of Exile 1 didn't click
Good
for
problem
me.
to have.
I tried. I really tried. I love ARPGs. However, years of added content, systems, and depth made the original game just too big to consume. I didn't want to watch 2-hour videos to understand build crafting. There were so many mechanics and things like that to learn that I didn't even know what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And there was just so much game to play, too much game to play. For me, I would imagine it's probably the same for a lot of other players. Path of Exile 2 marked a second opportunity to get in on this game on the ground floor before this ship sets sail. A chance to understand the game on a fundamental level before the game evolves into a behemoth. And I am so glad that I did. This game is just so damn engaging, whether it's the combat, the spells, the abilities, the movement, the dodge rolling, the environments, the build crafting, or the items. Everything just draws you deeper and deeper into this game, and it doesn't let you go.
Not only all that, the story is one of the coolest things you can experience currently in a game. That specific boss back here, this wolf, has one of the coolest boss fights. It is one of the best boss fights when everything drops and you get the fog and he jumps in and out of the fog attacking you while other wolves spawn, but then he starts giving this like poem as he's doing it, and it's just freaking awesome. And it's hard, it's difficult, and that is one thing about the game, is that it is difficult, but at the same time, while it's difficult, it's new player friendly in how you can play and understand the game, which is a huge deal. That's why people don't care about the price tag that's on it. That's why they don't care that it's unfinished, because the game feels, for the majority of the time that you're playing it throughout the story and everything, it feels finished. It feels like you're getting your money's worth. Every fight is enjoyable and different. You don't go into one fight thinking, man, this feels just like the one I previously played. Like, every boss fight feels truly different from each other.
Items, everything just draws you deeper and deeper into this game, and it doesn't let you go. I could make an entire video just talking about the boss fights in this game, the depth of their mechanics, their animations, the clear telegraphs, and their music. My gods, the music in this game, start to finish, Path of Exile 2 feels like a more complete experience than 90% of the fully priced $70 AAA titles that I've played in the last few years. Every single time I sit down to play this game, I find something else that makes me sit back and say, damn, why is this so good? From my perspective, Path of Exile 2 feels like the first real evolution within this genre, the same way that Baldur's Gate 3 feels like the real evolution within turn-based or CRPGs, that generational leap that is...
That's a big deal. Like, that is true, because this is one of the first times I've truly enjoyed with Path of Exile 2. It's one of the first times I've truly enjoyed an ARPG. I haven't played many before. I played Diablo 4, which obviously D4 bad. Don't have to say it. And then I played Last Epoch, which I did think Last Epoch was good and it was enjoyable, but it's nowhere near Path of Exile 2. And the same happened with Baldur's Gate 3. I do not like turn-based games. I never have liked turn-based games, but Baldur's Gate 3 was so different because of the amount of freedom that game gave you. Everything you could do, you got connected to the character that you made. You became connected to. You were that character. The choices that were made were directly from you. It wasn't predetermined or anything. You could do whatever you wanted. And then fighting was enjoyable because there was another level of strategy that was done extremely, extremely well. And even amongst it, you still felt like that character was you. And that's a huge deal. And something that to me, a lot of turn-based games don't actually get right.
damn near indescribable. I brought this up in a previous video, but I'm going to reiterate on this because this is exactly what I thought ARPGs would be like in the future. When I was trouncing around Champions of Norath, wielding swords imbued with fire and ice, jamming to Saturate by Breaking Benjamin, daydreaming of what games I would play as an adult, this is exactly that game. It captures the essence of a true journey, that quest for power that many of us have been seeking. From the moment that you begin, either if it's your first character or if you're playing the game solo self-bound, the game hits hard. At times, it's gruelingly difficult, dodging projectiles, taking on massive bosses that make you feel just so insignificant, listening to the callouts to be able to avoid massive attacks, managing your health and mana, making sure that you're not overusing mana or healing flasks, surviving fights by the skin of your teeth, and constantly adjusting your build to take on new challenges. As you continue, you earn the power to gradually trivialize the game, and it slowly transforms into something that feels much more similar to Path of Exile 1, clearing screens of enemies with ease, zipping through maps and picking up loot. It's incredibly satisfying to build your first character, knowing that every step, every triumph, and everything you've done.
I think the biggest thing that he mentions that is such a big deal is the ability to earn the earning that trivialization of the game. Like, you don't start out like that. You start out playing it very slow and methodical. It's very much, you know, you can die very simply. But as you increase and as you build and as you get more, the game gets easier and easier. Even when the enemies get harder, the game is still getting increasingly easier because your build starts to come online. And then two, they make it very simple to switch. You can change that build. You can adjust that build to do other things. I was at first starting with a monk with full lightning, and then about, I don't know, halfway through the campaign, or further than halfway through, actually. I was in the third act of the campaign. It was just early game technically, but still third act of the campaign. I decided that I wanted to swap to going full ice, and I was able to respec everything of mine to go into ice, and then started having an even easier time because of the different ice builds and the meta of that and everything like that. But the game makes that available. You're able to do those things, and I was able to respec and build right back up to where even though enemies got harder, bosses got harder, it was still enjoyable because I still had a level of power fantasy. That's the biggest thing. I think that's to me, a key word is power fantasy. You felt it powerful. You feel like you are actually making a difference in the game when you're moving through these maps and killing things and through the tunnels and the corridors and everything like that of these dungeons. It feels meaningful. You feel like you're actually doing something, and it's cool. It looks cool. It feels cool. And that's such a big deal, is the power fantasy of it. And you earn that power fantasy over time.
Done was earned through your own effort. That's how I've always wanted these games to feel, and Path of Exile 2 captures that feeling perfectly. I think one of the biggest strengths of this game and why it's performed so well is that it made itself so much more approachable to a wider audience without removing any of the complexity or depth that people enjoyed in Path of Exile 1. They just removed a lot of the needless confusion from many of the game's systems. Skill gems specifically, yes, I understand that you can read tooltips in Path of Exile 1 to know what skill gems will support what support gems and vice versa. But look, I don't know what to tell you other than the fact that I don't want to read, and the vast majority of other players don't want to read either. I'm not afraid to say that I need some bumpers in games to keep me on the right path. Otherwise, I'll get confused, make mistakes, and ultimately give up because I'm just here to enjoy myself. That's why I quit Path of Exile 1. Multiple times over the years, every time I tried to play that game, I just couldn't figure out what I was trying to do. And if I ever made any mistakes, well, the game would then tax me by making me have all these different currencies that I need to be able to respec my skill tree. And I'm not going to go farm that stuff. That's not fun. That's not engaging. That's boring. And I don't want to be punished. The revamped skill gem system and being able to respec with gold streamlined my experience. It just made it so much easier to engage with. It took away needless distractions, and it gave me more time to be able to understand and, more importantly, appreciate this game's world design, monsters, music, items, the skill tree, skill gems, how skills can cascade off of one another, and all these different finer elements of the game. And
in other words, they allow you to just play the game. You're not spending your life in your inventory. You're not spending your life in your stat sheets. You're not spending your life in those things. You can just play the game. That's something that people forget about, I think, is with especially these kinds of games where you can build characters and do all this. It's like you're either playing Tetris in your inventory, or you're spending 4 years trying to figure out what it is you're trying to build and do and everything like that. Where it's like, when do you get to the point where you actually just want to play the game? And this game allows you to just do that. You go into your skill tree, and like, don't get me wrong, it's loaded with stuff, and you can spend loads of time in there, or you can click the next node, you can move on, you're going to get a buff, and then you can go play. It's viable for both kinds of people. There is some people that want to spend time in their skill trees. You can do that, or you can choose not to.
I know I'm not alone in this. From my perspective, this is what it means when you're making a game for a broader audience. All the depth and the freedom, it's all still there. All that skill expression is still there. But they're not gatekeeping it behind convoluted systems that just aren't necessary. Because if they were necessary, well, these developers would have kept it. How do I know that? Because there is so much care, attention to detail, and respect for the audience's intelligence and maturity in this game. Act 3 spoiler warning, but in the final act of this game, in the final act of early access, you go back in time to the Vol Empire. You make your way through this ancient city, colorful, beautiful, and prosperous. As you continue to make your way up the steps, each area hints at something darker. First, there's less color, then there's canals that seem to be filled with blood, and then at the summit, you see sacrifices and piles of body. At the end, you end up going into the Black Chamber. This entire area is like Aztec meets Prometheus meets Hellraiser, body horror, ritual sacrifices, lasers cutting cadavers, people being kept alive with their spines removed. I was so intrigued by this place. It was so foreign and horrifying. I couldn't stop studying the map. The creativity, imagination, freedom.
Dude, this place was crazy, because you go and like, there's not much of a hint of, I guess, technology in the game. And you get through this and you end up in this area, and it's just like, holy crap, they have technology, which is insane, because you don't get that. This is a very fantasy stylish game, and then you go into here and it almost becomes sci-fi. And that was crazy to see. And this whole area is probably one of my favorite areas to be in, because of the environment of this, and because it was so different from what I expected from the game. It was crazy different.
Freedom and sheer disregard for anyone that could be offended by this. This is only possible when you have a studio and leadership that cares about making their game. That's exactly what kind of game this is. It's so rare to see a studio that develops a game that's really their own, and Grinding Gear Games owns Path of Exile 2. This goes back to a discussion that we had previously, studios and publishers creating games for audiences that they're not a part of. Good games, from my perspective, translate across generations. You don't need to water down the mechanics or your story. You don't need to simplify the gameplay. You don't need to talk to the players like they're children. I can't imagine a universe in which, if they felt something that was necessary to maintain the integrity of Path of Exile 2, that they wouldn't keep it in the game no matter the cost of player retention or its accessibility to new players. You can feel the authenticity, you can feel the beating heart of this game, and you can feel that they own it. This is going to be a topic for a future video. I just have to write the script for it and actually do a lot of the research. But have you guys noticed that over the last few years, making a game for everyone means making a game that won't offend anyone? It's not about the content that's delivered. It's not about what the game is actually going to be like. It's about making something that's going to look good in the eyes of critics, in the eyes of the media, in the eyes of something that was necessary to maintain the integrity of Path of Exile 2. That they wouldn't keep it. You can feel the... This is going to be a topic for a future video. I just have to write the script for it and actually do a lot of the research. But have you guys noticed that over the last few years, making a game for everyone means making a game that won't offend anyone? It's not about the content that's delivered. It's not about what the game is actually going to...
I would argue that it's an issue, that's even a concern of like trying to like offending people. I mean, you look at some of the best games like way back that were just, they weren't offensive. Like, I don't think anybody saw games that were not offensive. I mean, you look at Assassin's Creed 3. Like, Assassin's Creed 3 was a game set during the Washington era, or pre Washington era, when he was still a general. And one of the best quests I've done in a game is when you are literally fighting with George Washington, which was amazing. But like you played as it was Connor, who is a native, and you were on the side of America. Keep in mind, this is, I mean, nowadays we live in a society that wants to tell you that all that the English did when they came here, and all that America did, was just fight the natives, which is kind of crazy. But nobody was offended by that game, at least as far as I know. And I was quite a bit younger when I played it, but nobody was. And it's one of my favorite games that I've played, to be honest. So I'm not sure why it is that it's a thing to be like, just with the society and with the woke kind of stuff, and the way people are a bit more sensitive now, obviously, leads to them being a bit more offended by things. But at the end of the day, I think if you're making a good game, nobody cares. Like, it could be quote unquote offensive, but if it's a good game, nobody cares. I mean, we've seen it multiple times with many games.
Going to be like, it's about making something that's going to look good in the eyes of critics, in the eyes of the media, in the eyes of social media, more than anything else. How are you supposed to make anything that's authentic, creative, or engaging if you're so worried about hurting someone's feelings? That's just not where their priorities are. Path of Exile 2 is definitely not worried about stepping on anybody's toes, that's for sure. And I think that's where the industry has faltered over the last couple of years. I mean, look at the state that things are in. We have
The biggest thing is it's not worry about stepping on other people's toes, because it doesn't have any like reason to. Like, when you get into the realm of like worrying about offending people, you were already too far in the realm of probably adding something in your game that might honestly be too political leaning one way or another. Like, if that is a even remotely ooh, this might offend someone, then you should probably just honestly not add it, because you already are leaning politically, or maybe it's not exactly politically, but you're already then leaning away. If you had that thought, then you're already leaning a certain way. But the thing is the Path of Exile, grinding your games with Path of Exile 2, I don't think that they ever had that thought, oh, this might be offensive. No, they made a game and they added things in the game that fit the style of the game. When you're going through the sci-fi like area of the temple, and you're seeing the cadavers and the people being cut and everything, and it's like I guess you could see that as offensive, but it's fitting for the kind of game that you're playing, and the game has built up to that point since. And so it's like, at what point, like, there was no point, I don't think, that they were like, oh no, this might be offensive. No, they made the game they wanted, and they made a style, they made things in that game that were fitting to that game. But when you as a developer, when you're sitting there going, oh, this might be offensive, you're too, that to me is, you're almost too far gone at that point. So you probably shouldn't add that thing, because if you're thinking that, then that's on the forefront of your mind, and that's probably something that doesn't need to be in your game. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I would argue you just don't need to have that.
mature rated games that are coming out that feel like they're made for elementary school kids. Characters with interchangeable personalities, romances, and relationships that are so flaccid that you wonder whether or not the writers even have interacted with human beings outside of Reddit, lowering their standards constantly, either through gameplay or through the game's narrative, ultimately damaging the quality of that game in the end. They don't know who to listen to. They keep paying attention to the wrong things. I think that's why Path of Exile is so special. I think that's why Path of Exile 2 is so special, because they've come to realize when to listen to themselves and when to listen to their audience.
I want to think, like, when I think about, like, especially when it comes to romances and relationships in games, like, the problem is that in my opinion, as crazy as it sounds, almost too many games have romancing and relationships. Like, I think that's to me, it's getting kind of annoying. Like, you don't need every relationship to be a romantic one for a game to work. the best example is my favorite game ever, God of War 4 and Ragnarok. The relationship, and arguably in Ragnarok, that's where it got even a little rocky with the relationships, because they added in a level of a romantic relationship. But like with God of War 4, the relationship was between a father and a son. Can you imagine? I don't think the game would have been nearly as good if the relationship was between Kratos and Faye at all. Like it's the game is so good because they built a dynamic and a relationship between a father and son, and they wrote it extremely well. And it's because Cory Barlog wrote it from the place of a father that had just had children. And so that's the thing, is I think there's too many times where writers, it's just like I was talking about earlier with developers going to work in a company for a game that they don't necessarily care about. A developer that loves farming games working on, in EA Sports. It's the same idea where you have writers that probably are writing in situations that they have never been in, they've never experienced. And so they are writing that from that perspective from a perspective that they don't understand. And so it's, in all honesty, written stereotypically from how they perceive it from the outside. And you don't get that meaning or that true feeling in that writing. And so it's risky to do relationships in general, because if you don't have writers that have engaged in those kinds of relationships, whether it be romantic, whether it be father-son, whether it be a friendship or whatever, then it doesn't work. I mean, another big one is the relationship. When you watch Arcane, when you watch season 2, and you have the relationship between Victor and Jace. I mean, people wanted that to be a gay relationship, and it wasn't, because the writers didn't want it to be. They wanted to be able to show that a relationship can be a brotherhood that didn't have to be romantic or have any sexual tension to it. And it's kind of like, why is that in a way lost? Why does everything have to be romantic? I think that's something that a lot of people think, is it's like, oh, these people should get together, or these people should do this. It's like, what if these two guys are just like brothers and they support each other like a brother would? What if there's a relationship between a father and a son written by a father? Like, that's a huge deal. And I think that's a bit lost, because writers are writing about things that they have not themselves personally engaged in.
They know when to listen to the audiences that they don't have yet either. That's a really tough balancing act to be able to pull off, because you have to be able to know when and when not to listen to all those people, because all of their feedback at any given time is going to either be valuable or detrimental to your game. And I think in a lot of cases, some studios just turn off the sound entirely. They just don't listen to anybody, and they just go off of what, I don't know, maybe some marketing team wrote down or something like that. I look at a game like Halo Infinite, right? And this is a really good example of this. They listened to the veteran player base, the veteran Halo player base that was like, no battle royale. At the peak of battle royale,
the worst mistake, in my opinion, a company has made in the past few years of games coming out is 303 deciding not to make a BR. The game was so utterly perfect for a BR. For them to not put that in the game is criminal. It's upsetting, because as someone that used to love Halo Reach. In my opinion, Halo Reach is the best Halo game that's ever been made. I know people will argue about that, but for them to rob me of an experience of a Halo Battle Royale is upsetting. It could, I think, a simple, not a whole lot of change needed to happen to the Halo formula and the way that it was, with over shields, with the weapons, with the different abilities, all that. None of that stuff needed to change for them to be able to create an amazing battle royale. And it is beyond frustrating that they never did. That is hands down one of the worst mistakes a company has made, the recent years with the game. I think, to me personally, because I never had any stake or interest in Concord, to me personally, Halo not making a BR is a bigger fail than Concord being released. I'm just gonna say it. That's how it is.
Popularity. While that game had a litany of issues, you don't think that that probably would have helped the game's popularity a little bit? I mean, come on. It would have given it a little bit of something.
A lot
Grinding
of
Gear
something.
Games proves over and over again throughout the entire history of Path of Exile 1, and now they're doing it again with Path of Exile 2, and we're going to get into that. But they know when to listen to their audience, and they also know how to have humility when they're wrong. Because you also have to be able to admit that you're wrong at different times. Because I'm sure there's some things in the game that are in there right now that the players hate, that the developers think needs to be there. And at one point in time, they're going to probably just give it a chance and see how it goes. But you also know how you got to know when to be able to put your foot down and say no in some cases. Because I've seen the whole reason I'm bringing this.
I think that there's actually more to wanting to be open about being wrong that is actually more cultural and generational than it was before. Because I think in previous cultures and generations, one, you could say gaming wasn't as big, but two, I think that people didn't care as much about the realness of the developers. Whereas I think that we are in a culture and a generation now, we're in a society that wants that real, raw, experience. They want developers to be honest. They actually care about that. I mean, more than ever, I think young people specifically want people to be very real with them. They want that bluntness, when that's something I don't think has been, maybe it's been desired, but it hasn't been voiced that it's been desired, I think, previously. Whereas we are now in a place where that is voiced. So I think these larger, at least AAA companies, have been used to not having to be real and be open and be honest about things, and then that's a bit of a throw off when they do. And so now they're trying to switch it up and such, and they're obviously not doing a good job of it, because we do. Why can't Activision come out after they do something bad in Call of Duty and they can say, you know what, we did that bad, we're going to make an adjustment, or we're going to make a fix there? Like, that's something that people need, companies need to be more comfortable with doing, because if anything, it doesn't hurt a reputation, it increases it. I think it's at least respectable when someone can admit that, when a developer can admit that they did something wrong with the game and are willing to go back and fix or adjust it.
This up is because I've seen a lot of people that have been talking about the skill gem system and how it needs to revert back to Path of Exile 1. I don't know if I would play this game if they did that. I mean, I probably would, because I have a better understanding of the general systems, but I'm going to let you know, just to change.
I wouldn't. This system that is in Path of Exile 1, I have seen even just videos and clips of it, and I would not, by any means, under no circumstances, probably play that game. It looked so beyond complicated, it was unreal. Every single time you got a new weapon or something, you had to swap your gems. That is criminal.
Like that is enough to completely disrupt this game being able to reach a wider audience. And at the end of the day, you want more players. That's how this game maintains its success. It's how it makes more money. It's how they continue to be able to deliver you more content in the future. I'm sure they took some pretty big risks on trying to put this game out, and that's one of the key pillars from my perspective of what's making this game so much more accessible to a wider audience, and why it's so much more popular than it normally would have been. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why players have come to trust them. It's because they know when to listen and they know when not to. They know how to prioritize whatever their creative vision for the game is, and how to also listen to their players when it really matters. And that's something that I think that they've really done a good job at cultivating over the years. That's the audience that they've created. That's the community that they've created. And from my perspective, that's the most valuable thing that the industry needs to learn from Path of Exile 2. I was a part of Baldur's Gate 3's early.
I think a big thing too that is important to learn is balancing, like he was kind of saying, is balancing how you make a game for a new player and a veteran, right? Too many games want to appeal to the veteran players because they assume that they've been in the game, they understand what works, they'll explain to us what does and does not work. But here's the problem: is the best way to put it, I think, would be like, a veteran player can determine what worked in the past, but they are not good at determining what can work in the future. And so they can know a whole lot about what was good and what was bad previously in the game's life, or in the previous game's life if it's a sequel or something along those lines. They can direct, and veteran players can voice what it is that they did or did not like in those previous games that you can replicate. But they will never be good at being able to tell you what can and cannot work in the future, given you're not just repeating the same mistakes. I mean, you take certain things like Warframe is a big one, for instance, where honestly, the new player experience hasn't ever really been touched because there's never been a giant need to, because the majority of the players that are playing the game are veteran players. They're not playing through that new player experience. And now that we're seeing a surge of players that are kind of hopping off of the Destiny train, moving to the Warframe side or whatever game it might be, that they are in Warframe specifically, more people going through that new player experience and seeing how rough it is and how bad it is. And you're able to get more statistics on how many people are not playing before they get to the point of the game that really propels you and shoots you forward with the quest of the second tree. And so now Digital Extremes has to hopefully look at it, and I think they have said that they will, but they have to look at it and they have to figure out how to refine and fix that new player experience to get people involved and get them playing, because there is now a demand for that. And you could arguably say there was always a demand for it, but it wasn't a very front and center demand because the primary group of people were veteran players. And so they weren't able to tell what can work in the future. It's a big deal. They know what happened previously. They can tell you what's good and what's not good based off of previously existing attempts or tries at changing the game or whatever it may be. They will not be able to dictate what can or cannot work down the road.
Early access. And throughout that entire process, I kept asking myself, why isn't everyone on Earth playing this game or talking about it? Now, little did I know that's exactly what ended up happening with that game, but even when that game was barely playable at times, you could feel that there was something truly special going on there. You could feel it in the gameplay, in the narrative, the way that the developers communicated and involved their community. Path of Exile 2 is emulating and replicating those same markers for success. Path of Exile 2 is using early access in the way that it's meant to be used. They're directly engaging with their community, and every action they take feels like a refreshing contrast to how players are often treated by other studios and publishers. Too often, players are treated like the enemy or cash cows, and it's no surprise why those games end up failing.
I think that's the big thing is early access is used as a manner of making money immediately to almost effectively plan and fund what the rest of the game is going to be. It's making half of a game to release half of a game to then work on the rest of the game. And when I say work on the rest of the game, that means like why games now feel like the games in early access specifically feel like they were half-made games that didn't have the other half planned until after they made money from the early access. They started working on it, which is a huge problem because early access should be developers releasing their game with the full game in mind of how it's going to be made and completed and delivered. Just doing it in early access to get info and to get opinion and things like that on the state of the game, building up to that full release, which is exactly what Path of Exile is doing. The game is 80% done from what they've said. There's a 20% more that they actually need to complete before the full release of the game, which they have planned and are working on, which is a really, really big deal.
When I interviewed Jonathan Rogers, I had one burning question about the game's monetization. In an industry that is constantly trying to squeeze its customers, why would Grinding Gear Games transfer all of their purchases from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2? From a business perspective, they were leaving money on the table. Why not just reset everything and start everybody off fresh in a new microtransaction ecosystem?
What are the incentives that we as a company will have depending on how we structure this? So I'm like, okay, if we make sure that the microtransactions span across both games, that means that as a company, we will have an incentive to make sure that Path of Exile 1 continues to receive content, because we will still be getting monetization from that. Because
Yeah.
the feeling that players will have is that POE1 is still getting because POE1 will still be getting monetization because of the fact that all that stuff goes back as well as forwards. That means that we'll always be incentivized to support it. So effectively, I want to build into what the company's what the company is doing, a way to incentivize us to do the right thing here. And so that's part of the reason why we did it that way. It doesn't matter for those things, right? If our goal is long-term success of POE2 and 1, then it really, we can make this, and I don't think it should really hurt us at all in the long term. So I think just for several reasons, it was the right move to do. And obviously players, are very happy about it as well. It makes the people who played the game before feel valued, and we're not just going to throw this stuff in the garbage whenever we decide to do something new, which I think is very important. There's that feeling of we actually care about all that stuff that we sold you before. So I think that all of that stuff combined really does just make for, to me, a no-brainer decision. So this wasn't a difficult decision at all. It was something that was very obvious to us right from the point when we decided to make POE2, and so I guess that's the sort of our thinking behind it.
Why devalue?
I would argue that I think it's an obvious decision across the board, no matter what developer it is, but they don't want to. It's a desire of obviously it's a want, not this makes sense. When you look at any game, and I will say you look at Warzone, they've done a good job of it, where every gun you can use from all of the games in Warzone. That's cool, but it really is just this case of games that will reset things and redo things for the future. Some games do it on a full release, where anything you did in the early access didn't matter, because on full release everything gets reset, which is a bit frustrating. But there are games that do some things the right way as well. So it's but if you come out with a second game in the line of something, whatever you spend money on in the first game, past buying the game itself, if the game is paid, where Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2 are both free, but if you're buying the base game itself and then you're spending microtransactions even past that, which there are games that have that, you should be able to transfer. It would be very frustrating if something say if Digital Extremes does something like Soulframe, right, which is going to be coming after, of course, Warframe. If it has to do with getting different frames and things like that, like you do in Warframe and having different characters, then you should be able to transfer the bot frame slots that you have in Warframe into Soulframe. And if you can't, that would be frustrating. That would be a mistake. So it truly is just a matter of it is an obvious decision that developers should make to allow you to go back and forth between the games with anything that you've bought and the monetization. But it's a desire that developers don't want to, or at least the higher ups in those companies don't want to.
What players purchased? Why undermine their trust? Their goal is to bring in new players while keeping the current ones engaged, and by honoring what players have already bought, they're maintaining the trust that they've built over time. New players will buy new things, but why throw away the loyalty of the ones that you already have? Look at the industry today. Jagex and old school RuneScape putting out surveys wanting to put in ads into their game and make account security a paid feature, or Ubisoft, who, quote, accidentally put ads into their pause menu and then claimed it was a bug later, or their statements about how players need to get used to not owning games for them to be able to use their rental services. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth put New Game Plus behind a paywall. The industry continues to push monetization tactics that devalue the player's experience, while developers like Grinding Gear Games are choosing to, give back, supporting their audience with free and meaningful content while also respecting the content that those players spent money on. This player-first mentality is woven throughout everything that Path of Exile 2 has done so far. I remember when I was talking to Jonathan Rogers about their decision to shift their focus from the campaign to the endgame, his reasoning felt like pure common sense. Games like this are defined by their endgame. That's why players keep coming back. And if they didn't have an endgame that was solid, or if an endgame wasn't there, then they would find themselves in the same position that Blizzard did with Diablo 4, promising an endgame later. And that's a much harder hole to dig yourself out of rather than fixing a couple things or adding a campaign. Grinding Gear Games has mastered the...
As crazy as it sounds, though, I would argue so far, at least with the end game is obviously the main portion that people are going to be spending their time in. but this game's campaign was so good that part of me almost wishes they did finish the campaign and release that too, because I want to experience the next portion of it. Which is kind of a crazy thing when you have something like this game where the end game is that is 80% of the game is what you're doing at the end game. Only 20% of it is what you're doing in that story. But the story was so good and it was so enjoyable to fight those bosses, and do those things, that I want to continue playing that. Like, that's what kind of pulled me out of it, to be honest. At first was having to go back, and now I've done probably 5 or 6 different characters and things like that, playing through the initial story. And so when I finally took a character to the cruel difficulty of the story, I'd done it so many times I was kind of bored of it. But if it would have continued forward into the next portions of the game, then that would have been awesome. You catch me in that all day long, and that's something that I have to look forward to when the game does have its full release, is those next 3 acts. 3 brand new bosses that I haven't been able to experience or engage with or anything like that. And I'm super excited for that. And that's going to make my money's worth even more.
Art of balancing both the needs of its players and its development team. They learned that players are going to get the most value out of the end game, and by focusing on it, they're just making a better game for everyone. Plus, it's a grind that they know all too well from supporting Path of Exile 2, which means that they can move much faster, deliver more content, and more fun to both the team and the players. And the crazy thing is, they've already proven that a month into Path of Exile 2's launch, and they just released a massive patch that addressed a bunch of bugs and issues and crashing and implemented a ton of player feedback. Players had complained about repetitive towers on the Atlas map, so they added more tile sets. They rebalanced gear prefixes and affixes to make loot feel more rewarding. They increased monster density in certain areas, and they added respawns to the pinnacle boss and a ton of other improvements. What really struck me about this update, the game's first update, beyond just how jam-packed it was with improvements, was how humble the developers were when they were discussing it. During the Tavern Talk podcast with my friend Darth Microtransactions and his co-host Gazi TV, Jonathan Rogers spoke about the changes and how they had came to their decisions for the things that they put into the game. The whole time, they never acted like they were married to any single idea. Jonathan would often say, if the players think that's an issue, I'll look into it. Or if this idea doesn't work out, we'll change it. The humility and the respect for the players is exactly what makes this game so successful.
I think that's a big deal with things, is not being so stuck on an idea that not for a developer to not be so stuck on an idea that they have, that even if it's bad, they think it could be good, they force players to engage in it. That kills so many games. It's like, it doesn't, at the end of the day, this is a product. If it's bad, people are going to stop buying it. They're going to stop using it. They're going to stop engaging with it. They're going to stop playing your game. Even if you think your idea was good, or even if it maybe in a different circumstance, it would have been good. If the players don't want it, then you have to be able to get rid of it. It's the idea of, in editing, there's the term of kill your darlings. And essentially it is cut even those things in the edits when you're editing, cut out even those shots that you think are like just the money shots, the oh man, I love this is the greatest shot possible. If it doesn't add to what the full spectrum of what you're making is, then it should not be there. And it's the same for a game. If it doesn't add to the player experience, both new and old player experience, it should not be there. It doesn't matter how good of an idea it was at one point. It doesn't matter on how much you love it or how much you feel you want it as a developer at all. Be willing to get rid of anything in your game that isn't working.
I think this is why players trust Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile. Authenticity, respect, and humility. Trust is a delicate thing, especially in today's gaming industry. With every single new release, there is a sense of uncertainty. We get trailers that have little to no gameplay, we rarely get demos, and prices continue to rise. Microtransactions are more prevalent than ever. Publishers want to bring games to $100, and it feels like the industry is at odds with its own audience, with studios believing that they know better than the players. games often now come with their own agendas, or they have some attempt to deceive the player base in some way, shape, or form. And year after year, trust is eroding from this industry. I think it's crazy to look and realize that this game is only half of a game, half of the classes, half the gear, half the skills, half the campaign, half of everything. And we're seeing this much support and authenticity. And I'm hoping that players aren't taking this for granted, because this is an incredibly special moment for Path of Exile and just games in general. Because on full release, this game is going to be a monster, and it's going to be something that's going to be remembered forever. Path of Exile and Grinding Gear games stand apart because they are redefining what trust looks like within the gaming industry. Through their transparency, respect for their players, and their commitment to creating value rather than extracting it, they've created a game and a community built on genuine respect. In a time where many studios are more concerned...
I don't think it's that they're redefining it. I think it's that they're bringing back previous trust that AAA developers had when they weren't AAA developers. All they're doing is doing the same obvious things that a game developer should be doing in the first place. It's things that developers do when they aren't AAA developers, when they don't have investors, when things like that, and they are reliant solely on the income of their players. That's a big deal. When you are someone and you are a company where you don't have these investors that are putting into your game, and I know that obviously Grinding Gear games probably does, but in general, indie games, you look at why indie games are sometimes so good is because the people that make indie games are so willing to listen to the community around those games, because that community is how they make their money. If they don't satisfy the community that they're making the game for, then they are not going to make their money. So it's not a matter of, oh, we're going to do this to try to make more money in our game. It's, oh, we're going to do this for the players so that they want to continue to play our game, they want to buy our game, and so that they trust us for our next game. And that is a huge deal.
With profit margins rather than the player experience, Path of Exile has become a rare example of how trust can still thrive within this industry. I think that the video game industry is headed for a significant shift, a major transformation, because I think that over the years, as the industry has grown and as more investor interest has come in, and it's just gotten so much more corporatized, there's all this different money flowing in from all over the place. You had a bunch of leadership that came from different industries that thought they could make a life for themselves here. And when you don't have creatives that are the ones that are leading the charge, they make
pretty
products
much what I
that
just
fail.
said. Because
you have to be both the creator and the intended audience to be able to reach some of these audiences in the first place. You know, when I look at, Ubisoft, EA, Activision, Blizzard, these companies that have already successful live service games, and then I look at some of the failures in live service that we've seen over the last couple of years, you see how these games basically just straight up copied the same formula that was successful for some of these other games. And it makes a lot of sense why those games failed. Because if
First Descendant,
if I'm a player that was playing some of these games and they've done nothing to build trust with me, and I'm still invested in those games, I'm still playing them, I have friends that are playing them or whatever it might be, why would I go to a different game that's going to do the exact same thing on paper? I mean, like T for T, right? Like it's a 1-for-1 copy. I think that's one of the reasons why Marvel Rivals found success, is because they just changed one single thing, which is, you don't have to pay to be able to unlock heroes like Overwatch. You don't have to be in a battle pass or anything like that. You just get the character once it launches, simple as that. And that's enough to be able to turn players in the other direction, because
that portion I think I agree with. That wasn't it. It was the decisions that brought Overwatch to where it is, making it a game more about esports, and Marvel Rivals being truly fun. And then you also have the things about the IP. We talked about it earlier, like the IP makes a difference. The characters make a difference. It's not just that they changed one thing and that was enough to turn people away. It's that they understood that the market, people didn't want an esport. They wanted a fun game. That's the kicker. And so what did NetEase do? They made a fun game. They didn't make an esport. They didn't make a game designed to be an esport. Overwatch, Blizzard didn't make an esport in the beginning either. So it's like there was so much more than just changing the one thing about Free Heroes. I don't think that it's fair to say that that was the only thing that changed. I do see that the point he's making, though. I just don't know if Marvel Rivals is the perfect thing to actually, or the perfect example to use.
Generate some level of trust because they go, oh, these guys aren't trying to, beat me over the head and steal my wallet every single chance that they get. They look at it even as a small sign of trust and they go for it. I've talked about this a couple times. This is another like one of those random video ideas that I'll have and I'll put out at one point in time. But I do think that I don't think that the silent majority exists the same way that it used to. I brought this up in another video, but I think with the growing influence of social media, that even if players are not directly engaged with a game or with the game's audience or, the community feedback or whatever it might be, maybe they're not watching the YouTube videos or whatever, I think they're still indirectly influenced by the things that are going on with those games. So as an example, with Baldur's Gate 3, do you guys have any idea how many people had reached out to me that had either heard about the game through somebody else? They heard about how it didn't have microtransactions or whatever it might be. They hear about how well they treat their player base from somebody else. And then they want to come and try the game. That happens a lot because maybe you have a friend that's really engaged in these,
especially social
media
conversations,
but that friends end up recruiting the rest of their friends and bringing those people in to come and play these games. Yeah, I think that's what's selling games right now. I think authenticity and respect and trust are the things that are on sale. I think those are the things that players are attracted to. I hear that a game doesn't have microtransactions. I'm more interested in it. I hear a game doesn't have its own odd agenda. I'm interested in it. I hear a game is made because it's the creative vision that they genuinely have. I'm interested in it.
Yep.
And that's the thing that's really pushing out a lot of these games. And if you look back at some of the most successful games that we've had over the past couple of years, those are.
You know what the key term is? Because here's the thing that they would say, and this comes from primarily AAA developers. When you watch the developer directs, right, or things like that, or the trailers where developers will talk about the game, there's one of two things that they're going to say. They're going to either say, we love this, so we put it in our game. That's good. Or they're going to say, we think that players would love this, so we're going to put it in our game. That is when you know the game's going to be bad. Like, because you have then developers trying to decide what the players want instead of just listening to the players or making, like we said previously, a game that they will love. The game is not for them. The game was made for an audience that they maybe don't yet have. Because even then, if you take, say, Diablo 3 to Diablo 4, you had an audience for Diablo 3 that liked Diablo 3. It doesn't mean you just get an audience for Diablo 4. You don't just get to transfer that over. And so you're trying to make decisions. You're saying, well, we think that players are going to love this about our game. It's like, whoa. Stop there. You shouldn't be thinking what players are going to like. You should be making a game for you, for what you like and what you want to engage in, because the reality is there's probably thousands, millions of people, say, that are going to agree with you and they're going to like the same things, even if a few of them don't and don't play your game. That's okay. Not everybody needs to play your game. The people that like what you like, though, and the people that want to engage in the same things as you and in the game you make, those are the ones that you should be making the game for. Because you're making it then also for yourself.
Are those games, those are the things that the players are talking about the most, and that's ultimately what led them to buy those games in the first place. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson that the industry needs to learn. I've been having an absolute blast with Path of Exile. The entire time that I've been sitting here, I've been itching to get back to playing the game. I'm basically spinning in circles right now.
Me and Marvel Rivals right now, dude.
The pinnacle boss or anything like that, but I've just been having so much fun playing the game. It's been great playing it with friends too. I've had friends that have gotten into the game that I would have never thought would have played this game. And they are in way deeper than I am. I'm talking like I got a buddy of mine, it's like 350 hours in, and I'm like, you have a job. How do you even do that? But I'm really excited to see what this game.
I feel attacked. I don't want to look at my hours on games. I've passed 100 on Marvel Rivals, and yes, I have a job.
Whose future is. I really am, man. I've had so much fun with this game. I said it before. It's giving me the same vibes as Baldur's Gate 3, and that was such a special experience. And it's going to get the same kind of support. What can you say, man? It's exactly what you want.
Yep.
So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch. Maybe I'll put a link on the video. If I don't, it's going to be in the description or in the pinned comment down below.
Liked,
outside of that, my friends,
subscribed.
Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.
That was a good video. It was fun to watch.